When I first saw them together, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world had suddenly gone silent, as if every sound in the room had been swallowed by the truth I was seeing. There they were, my husband, Mark, and my son's fiancée, Emily, sitting close on the couch in our living room. The same room where we used to celebrate birthdays, watch movies, laugh as a family. But that day, something about the way she looked at him told me everything I wasn't supposed to know. It wasn't just the distance between them, it was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. I remember standing by the doorway, holding a basket of laundry, pretending I hadn't seen what I saw. But deep down, my heart knew something was terribly wrong. Mark noticed me and straightened up. "Hey, honey," he said, too casually. Emily quickly pulled away and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, I just stood there. My hands were shaking, but I forced a smile back. "Dinner will be ready soon," I said softly, before walking away to the kitchen. As I stirred the soup that night, I could barely feel my own hands. My mind kept replaying that small, quiet moment, the way he looked at her, the way she avoided my eyes. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, Emily was like a daughter to me. She had been in our lives for almost 2 years. Sweet, kind, always helping around the house. She made my son, Daniel, so happy. And Mark, well, he treated her like family. But that evening, something inside me shifted. It was as if a part of me had opened a door I didn't want to walk through. When Daniel came home later that night, full of excitement about wedding plans, I couldn't look him in the eye. I smiled, nodded, asked about the caterer, the dress, the music, all while trying not to cry. He didn't notice. How could he? A mother's heartbreak is often silent, buried under soft smiles and unfinished sentences. That night, when everyone was asleep, I sat by the window with a cup of cold tea. The moonlight fell across the living room floor, touching the same spot where I'd seen them sitting earlier. And in that quiet hour, I whispered to myself, "No one will ever believe me." I met Emily 2 years ago, on a spring afternoon that still feels clear in my memory. Daniel had brought her home for the first time. He was nervous, the kind of nervous that only happens when you really love someone. He'd said, "Mom, please don't make it awkward. She's a little shy." I remember laughing and promising him I'd be on my best behavior. When Emily walked through the door, she carried a bouquet of daisies and that bright, nervous smile people wear when they're trying to make a good impression. She had light brown hair that fell softly around her shoulders and eyes that looked like they were always searching for something. From the first moment I liked her, there was a gentleness about her, a warmth that filled the room. She wasn't loud or overly confident. She was quiet, polite, almost careful with her words. I could tell Daniel adored her. The way he looked at her made my heart soften. He hadn't been that happy in a long time. Mark joined us at the dining table that evening, cheerful as ever. He had a way of putting people at ease, cracking light jokes, complimenting the cooking, asking questions that made guests feel welcome. Emily seemed comfortable around him too. Maybe too comfortable, looking back now. But back then, I thought nothing of it. She laughed at his jokes, called him Mr. Bennett, and blushed every time he'd tease Daniel about being lucky to have her. At the time, it all felt harmless. A family growing, a son in love, a future daughter-in-law who felt like a blessing. Life went on like that for months. Emily started visiting often, sometimes to help me cook, sometimes just to sit and chat. She would bring over recipes her grandmother used to make, and we'd spend hours in the kitchen together. "Mrs. Bennett," she once said shyly, "you remind me of my mom." There was something about the way she said it, soft, grateful, that made me tear up a little. She'd lost her mother when she was 17. Maybe that's why she held on to family moments so tightly. I remember thinking, poor girl, she just needs love and a home that feels safe. So I opened my heart to her. I let her in. She helped me decorate the house for holidays. We'd wrap presents, bake cookies, and laugh about Daniel's terrible taste in sweaters. Even Mark joined in, joking that he finally had someone to side with against my bossy decorating style. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. The wedding plans began about a year later. Daniel proposed on a quiet evening at the lakeside, under fairy lights he'd hung himself. Emily said yes, crying and laughing at the same time. They came running to tell us the news, still holding hands, faces glowing. Mark hugged them both tightly. "It looks like our family's getting bigger," he said, smiling wide. I remember that night vividly. The warmth, the joy, the sound of their laughter echoing through the house. I told myself this was what every mother dreams of: a good son, a kind future daughter-in-law, a husband proud of both. I didn't know then that the same laughter would haunt me later. In the months that followed, Emily spent even more time at our home. She'd drop by unannounced, "Just to check on you," she'd say. Daniel worked long hours at the architect. You hold on to when life later breaks your heart. I didn't know that behind that warmth, another kind of closeness was forming, one that had nothing to do with me or Daniel. Looking back, I realize how much I missed. The late-night phone calls Mark said were about work, the weekends he suddenly had to spend at the office, the way Emily's visits seemed to align perfectly with his schedule. I noticed, but I didn't question it. Maybe because I didn't want to. Sometimes love makes you blind, even to the people standing right in front of you. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found them sitting close together, laughing over something on his phone. They both looked up when they saw me, startled, guilty in a way that only lasts a second. I smiled politely, said nothing, and walked back to the kitchen. But that was the first time my chest felt tight, like the walls of our home were holding a secret I wasn't meant to hear. A few weeks later, Daniel told me he'd be on a business trip, 3 days out of town. Emily offered to help me finish some wedding details while he was gone. I thought it was sweet of her to do that. She came over with her laptop, spread out papers across the dining table, and started working on guest lists. Mark came home early that day. The two of them exchanged a look, a small one, quick but heavy, the kind that says more than words ever could. I noticed, but I didn't speak. That night, lying in bed, I told myself again that I was imagining things, that people who love each other don't do things like that. But somewhere deep down, I think I already knew what was coming. I just wasn't ready to face it. That's how betrayal begins. Not with grand lies, but with little moments that don't feel wrong until it's too late. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew my husband, and I believed with all my heart that Emily loved my son. But the truth was already there, sitting quietly between them, waiting for the day I'd finally see it. The weeks that followed were strange. I couldn't quite explain it, but something in the house had changed. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, like a sound you only hear when everything else goes still. Mark started spending more time at home, which I thought would make me happy. For years, he had been so busy with work, meetings, deadlines, traveling, but now he seemed available, too available. He'd sit in the living room for hours, scrolling through his phone, smiling at messages he wouldn't let me see. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Just business stuff, honey." And Emily, she started calling more often. Sometimes she'd say she needed advice about Daniel's habits. "He's so messy, Mrs. Bennett," she'd laugh. Other times, she'd ask if she could drop by just to talk. Of course, I said yes. She was part of the family now, or soon would be. But every time she came over, I felt this uneasiness. I couldn't tell if it was her tone or how Mark seemed to appear in the room not long after she arrived. They were never doing anything wrong, not exactly. Just talking, laughing, sharing glances I couldn't quite understand. But something inside me whispered, "Look closer." One evening, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard soft laughter downstairs. At first I smiled. I loved the sound of joy in our home. But then I heard Mark's voice, low, familiar, followed by Emily's giggle. I walked quietly to the top of the stairs and looked down. They were sitting close together on the couch, heads bent over Mark's phone. Their shoulders brushed as they looked at the screen, laughing about something I couldn't hear. Mark said, "You can't tell him yet, all right?" And she nodded nervously. "I know. Don't worry. I won't." I froze. "Don't tell who?" "Daniel?" My throat went dry. I wanted to say something, to ask what they were talking about, but the words wouldn't come. I just turned around, went back to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking so badly that the folded shirts fell from my lap. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the wall, pretending everything was fine. That night, when Mark came to bed, he kissed my forehead. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Just tired." He smiled, turned off the light, and fell asleep almost instantly. I lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. I wanted to believe it was the same as always, calm, steady, familiar, but something felt different. There was a distance between us I couldn't reach anymore. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "You're imagining things again." The next day, Daniel came home early from work. He looked happy, excited. He said, "Emily's planning a surprise for you," he said with a grin. "A surprise?" I asked, pretending to smile. He nodded. "Yeah. She said she wants to do something special before the wedding." I felt my stomach twist. "That's sweet," I said softly. When Emily arrived that evening, she brought a cake and a small bouquet of flowers. "Just a little thank you," she said, "for everything you've done for us." Mark joined us at the table. We laughed, ate cake, and took pictures. To anyone watching, it looked like a perfect family moment. Smiles, love, happiness. But every time my eyes met Mark's, I saw something I couldn't name. A flicker, a hesitation, a secret. And Emily's smile, it looked practiced, like she was trying too hard to make everything look normal. Over the next few weeks, I tried to push my doubts away. I busied myself with wedding errands, flowers, invitations, dress fittings. I wanted to believe that if I stayed busy enough, my heart would stop whispering those awful things. But it didn't. It only got louder. One afternoon, I was cleaning the living room when I noticed something on the coffee table, Mark's phone. He'd left it there while mowing the lawn. A message popped up. I didn't mean to look. I really didn't. But my eyes caught the first few words. I miss you. Last night was... The rest of the sentence was hidden under the notification bubble, and right beneath it, Emily's name. I froze. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Every part of me screamed to look away, but I couldn't. I picked up the phone, unlocked it. I knew his passcode. He'd never hidden it from me before. When I opened the messages, there they were. Dozens of them. Soft words, late-night texts, little moments that spoke louder than anything else. I can't stop thinking about you. He doesn't know, does he? I wish things were different. Each word hit me like a wave, washing away everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. When Mark came inside, I was standing by the window, his phone still in my hand. He froze. "What are you doing?" I looked at him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who is she to you?" He didn't answer. The silence between us was heavy, and in that silence, I found my answer. He walked closer, his face pale. "It's not what you think." I laughed quietly, bitterly. "Then tell me what it is." He rubbed his forehead. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to ask, "How could you?" But no words came out. Instead, I said, "She's going to marry our son, Mark." My voice cracked on the last word. "Our son." He said nothing. He just buried his face in his hands and sighed, like the weight of his own choices was finally too heavy to carry. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the clock. It ticked softly, almost kindly, as if time itself was apologizing for what it had shown me. I thought about Daniel, about how much he loved her, how excited he was for the wedding. I thought about Emily's shy smile, her soft voice calling me mom. And then I thought about my husband, the man I had shared half my life with, the man I trusted to protect our family, not destroy it. How do you even begin to understand something like that? For the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. I cooked, cleaned, smiled when Daniel visited. I even answered Emily's calls, though my voice felt hollow each time. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend. I couldn't. It felt too shameful, too unreal. Like if I said it out loud, it would become permanent. But inside, something inside me was breaking, piece by piece. Every time Mark's phone buzzed, I flinched. Every time Emily's name came up, I felt sick. And every time Daniel talked about wedding plans, I wanted to cry. A few days later, Emily came over again. She looked nervous. "Is Mark home?" she asked. "He's at work," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Oh, right." I watched her walk through the living room, touching the back of the couch, the same place I had seen them sitting together that first day. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly.
She nodded. In the kitchen, as the kettle boiled, I looked at her carefully. She seemed smaller somehow, fragile, guilty. And for a moment, I felt pity. That night, when Mark came home, I told him quietly, I saw the messages. He sat down, his face pale. "Please don't tell Daniel," he said. His words shattered me. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I'll fix this," just, "Don't tell him." I looked at him and whispered, "You already did." He didn't answer. He just buried his face in his hands and sighed, like the weight of his own choices was finally too heavy to carry. Over the next few weeks, I tried to hold everything together. I kept the secret locked inside me, afraid of what it would do to Daniel if he knew. But pretending is exhausting. Smiling through pain is a kind of slow death. One evening, while Daniel and Emily were finalizing some wedding details,
It was a Sunday morning in early autumn. The air outside carried that faint chill that comes before the leaves begin to fall. I remember the smell of coffee filling the kitchen and sunlight slipping through the curtains in long, thin lines. It should have been an ordinary day, but it wasn't. Daniel had gone out of town for 2 days for work. Emily had said she would spend the weekend catching up on rest. Mark told me he had an early meeting and might be late for dinner. Everything sounded normal, so ordinary that it almost felt rehearsed. After breakfast, I busied myself with small chores, folding towels, watering plants, dusting the shelves. I tried to keep my hands moving so my mind would stay quiet, but the silence in the house felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Around noon, I realized I'd forgotten to buy milk. The small grocery store was only 5 minutes away, so I grabbed my coat and keys and stepped out. But halfway to the store, I remembered that Mark's car wasn't in the driveway when I left. It wasn't at the office either. His meetings on Sundays were rare. Something in my chest tightened. I told myself not to think too much, but the thought kept echoing. Where is he, then? I drove a little slower on my way back, passing through the neighborhood where Emily rented her apartment. It was purely coincidence or maybe something deeper pulling me there, but as I turned onto her street, I saw Mark's car parked right outside her building. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands clutched the steering wheel and the world went silent. I parked a few houses down and sat there, staring at the car I knew too well. The tiny dent near the license plate, the small sticker Daniel had once put there as a joke. I waited. Maybe there was another reason. Maybe he was just dropping something off for Daniel. Maybe anything else. But then I saw him. Mark stepped out of the front door, his jacket half-zipped, his face pale, and behind him, Emily. Her hair was messy, her eyes red, as if she had been crying or something close to it. He turned toward her, said something I couldn't hear, and then she reached out and touched his hand. Not by accident, not as a friend. My breath caught. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. They stood there for a moment, two people who should never have been in that scene together, and then Mark leaned forward and kissed her on the forehead. That tiny, simple gesture broke something inside me that words can't describe. I didn't honk, I didn't shout, I didn't even cry. I just drove home slowly, my eyes fixed on the road but my mind completely blank. When I got home, the house looked the same, flowers on the table, a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, the laundry waiting in the basket. Everything ordinary, and yet nothing was. I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours. I watched the sunlight move across the floor, changing angles as the day went on. My hands were cold, but I didn't move. It's strange the way time behaves when the truth finally catches up to you. It slows down. Every sound feels sharper. The clock ticking, the wind outside, the creak of the chair beneath you. Around evening, Mark came home. He placed his keys on the counter like always. "Long day," he said casually. I looked up at him and managed to whisper, "Was it?" He paused. Maybe something in my voice startled him. Then he smiled weakly. "Yeah, you know how Sundays are." I nodded, stood up, and walked past him. I didn't trust myself to speak. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo on the nightstand. Our wedding picture. Two young people smiling at a future they didn't yet understand. I whispered to that picture, "We made it this far for this?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices, imagining their laughter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them standing together outside that apartment door. At one point, I got up, walked to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked older somehow, tired. I whispered, "Who are you?" I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The next morning, Mark acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, read the newspaper, even asked if I wanted to go out for dinner that evening. I said nothing. He finally looked up, confused. Did I do something? I almost laughed at the question. Did I do something? I turned to him and said softly, "I saw you." His hand froze halfway through turning a page. He looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" I repeated, "I saw you at Emily's apartment." The silence that followed was unbearable. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then finally said, "It's not what you think." I smiled sadly. "It's never is it?" He tried to speak again, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't." I walked away before he could answer. That day, I decided to visit my sister Grace. She lived 2 towns over, a gentle soul who always knew when to listen without judging. When I told her everything, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Claire," she whispered. Hearing my own name spoken with pity felt strange, almost foreign. She took my hands and said, "You can't carry this alone." I shook my head. "Daniel's wedding is in 2 months. What am I supposed to do? Tell him his fiancée and his father?" My voice broke before I could finish. Grace sighed, squeezing my hands. "He deserves the truth, but you'll know when you're ready." I didn't answer. The truth felt too heavy to hold, too cruel to release. Days turned into weeks. Mark tried to act normal, helping around the house, making small talk, pretending we were fine, but the space between us grew wider with every passing day. Emily still visited, though less often. When she did, she was quieter, distant. Her smile had lost its ease. I think she knew I knew. Once, as she was leaving, she paused by the door and whispered, "Mrs. Bennet, I'm sorry." I looked at her and said softly, "For what?" She hesitated, eyes glistening. "For everything." And then she left. I stood there for a long time after she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever. A few days later, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He looked tired but cheerful. "Mom, I'm thinking of moving the wedding date up," he said. "Emily and I just want to start our life." I felt my throat close. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "Yeah, I think she's the one, Mom. I've never felt like this about anyone." I wanted to protect him from the truth, but how do you protect someone from something that's already happened? So I just smiled weakly. "If you're happy, then I'm happy." live with the pain a little better. One morning, I found Daniel sitting on the porch, staring at the street. His face looked different, tired, older, as if the past month had added years to him. I sat beside him, quietly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The air was still, the sound of birds faint in the distance. Finally, he said softly, "Did you know?" My heart sank. "Know what?" He said, "About Emily." His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes didn't leave the road ahead. I hesitated. "What did she tell you?" He exhaled slowly. "Enough." I turned toward him, searching his face for anger or blame, but all I saw was sadness, the kind that comes when the truth has already burned through everything. He whispered, "I thought she was my forever." I placed my hand on his. Sometimes forever isn't meant to last a lifetime. Sometimes it's just meant to teach us what love shouldn't feel like. He looked at me with tired eyes. "You sound like you've known that for a while." I smiled faintly. Longer than I wish I did. The days moved slowly after that, but something inside me began to shift. I started cooking again. Small meals, simple ones. I tended to the garden I'd ignored for weeks. The flowers had wilted, but the roots were still alive. It felt symbolic somehow. Fragile things still holding on beneath the surface. Daniel helped me with repairs around the house. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. But there was comfort in the silence, a quiet kind of healing. One afternoon, as we painted the porch railing, he said, "I can't believe Dad would do that to you." I paused, the brush frozen in my hand. People make choices, some out of weakness, some out of fear. He frowned. "And you're just okay with that?" I said softly, "No, but I'm learning to live with it. Anger doesn't undo what's been done." He was quiet for a while before whispering, "I don't know if I can forgive him." I looked at him, my heart aching for the boy who once believed his parents' marriage was unbreakable. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you, so you don't carry his mistakes as your own burden. He nodded slowly, though I could tell he wasn't ready yet, and that was okay. Healing doesn't come on command. A few weeks later, Mark called me. His voice was cautious, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "Yes." We met at a small diner on the edge of town. It was the same place we used to go when we were younger, when life was simpler and love felt easy. When I saw him, I was surprised by how much older he looked. His shoulders seemed heavier, his eyes dimmer. He smiled faintly. "You look well." I gave a small nod. "You don't." He gave a short, sad laugh. "Fair enough." There was silence for a while. The sound of clinking dishes and soft chatter around us filled the space between words. Finally, he said softly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I needed you to hear it." I stirred my coffee slowly. "You said you loved her." He sighed. "I thought I did, but it wasn't love. It was distraction. From getting older, from feeling invisible." I looked up at him. "And was it worth it?" His eyes met mine, full of regret. "No, not for a second." We sat there quietly for a long time. No yelling, no bitterness, just two people sitting in the ruins of what used to be their life. When the bill came, he reached for it. I stopped him. "No, Mark, you don't owe me that." He nodded slowly. "I guess I owe you more than I could ever repay." As we stood to leave, he said softly, "I still love you, Claire, even if you can't ever forgive me." I looked at him, feeling the weight of years, memories, laughter, and betrayal all tangled together. I whispered, "I know, and maybe that's the saddest part." That night, I couldn't sleep.
I walked to the backyard, the grass cool beneath my feet, and looked up at the stars. They seemed endless, quiet, patient. I thought about love, how it can be both beautiful and cruel, how it can save you and break you in the same breath. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Mark, but I also knew I couldn't let bitterness define me. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me still wanted peace, not with him, but within myself. A month later, Emily wrote me a letter. It came in a small white envelope, her handwriting neat and careful. It said, "Dear Mrs. Bennett, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry, truly sorry. I've been living with guilt that doesn't let me sleep. What happened between Mark and me was wrong. I take full responsibility. I never meant to hurt Daniel or you. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to not hate me. I don't expect forgiveness, just understanding. Emily." I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Not to forget it, but because I didn't need to read it again. One evening, Daniel came home with a box. He said, "I'm moving out," quietly. I nodded, trying to smile. "Where to?" He hesitated. "An apartment downtown, closer to work." He hesitated. "You'll be okay here." I looked around the house, the walls, the furniture, the memories. "I think it's time I learned to be," I said. He hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than you think, Mom." I whispered against his shoulder, "I hope you remember that about yourself too." When he left, the house fell silent again, but this time the silence didn't hurt as much. It just felt peaceful. The days that followed were slow but steady. I started walking every morning, through the park, past the lake, watching the sunrise paint the sky. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands, laughing, talking softly, and instead of bitterness, I felt something else, gratitude, that I had known love once, even if it hadn't lasted forever. I began volunteering at the local library, helping kids with reading programs. It gave my days purpose again. Little voices, innocent laughter. It reminded me that life continues, quietly, beautifully, even after heartbreak. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, I saw a familiar face walk in. "Mark." He smiled shyly. "Didn't expect to find you here." I smiled back, calm, steady. "I didn't expect you to look for me." He hesitated. "I heard you were volunteering. Thought I'd stop by." We spoke for a few minutes, polite, distant, civil. Then he said, "I'm moving out west. Got a job there. New start, I guess." I nodded. "Good for you." He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You always were the heart of this family, Claire. I'm sorry I broke it." I smiled faintly. "It was already cracked. You just didn't notice until it shattered." He nodded slowly. "Goodbye, Claire." "Goodbye, Mark." And that was it. No tears, no promises, just goodbye. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window again. The house was quiet, but this time it felt like peace, not loneliness. I looked out at the moon, round, calm, glowing softly, and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the silence, the forgiveness I hadn't yet spoken, but was slowly learning to feel. Maybe this is what healing looks like. Not forgetting, not fixing, but accepting. Accepting that love can fail, people can change, and sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop asking why. Weeks later, Daniel visited. He looked happier, lighter. He told me he'd been seeing someone new. I smiled genuinely for the first time in a long while. She must be special. He nodded, smiling shyly. Yeah, she's kind. She listens. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Then don't let the past make you afraid of her. He looked at me, understanding. I won't, Mom. That evening, as he left,
Spring came late that year. The air was cool and soft, carrying the faint smell of rain. The garden had started to bloom again, small green buds pushing through the soil, reaching for light. I found myself spending more time outside these days. There was something peaceful about walking. I decided to take a drive. I hadn't done that in months, just getting in the car and going somewhere without a reason. The road stretched long and empty, lined with golden fields and lazy clouds drifting overhead. I pulled over near the lake, the same one where we used to picnic when not with the same people, but you build. When I drove back home, the sun was setting, that soft orange light spilling across the sky like a gentle promise. I parked in the driveway, sat there for a moment, and smiled. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt mine. The walls that once echoed with pain now held something else. Peace. Maybe even gratitude. I walked inside, put the kettle on, and opened the windows. The curtains fluttered softly in the breeze. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the evening settle in. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its low rumble fading into silence. For a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly, but contentment. A quiet kind of acceptance that life, despite everything, keeps moving. I still think about Mark sometimes, not with anger, not even sadness, just memory. He was a chapter of my story, not the whole book. And Emily, wherever she is, I hope she finds peace too. We were all broken in different ways, caught in choices that changed more than we understood. But maybe that's what life really is. A series of imperfect people doing the best they can, even when they fail. As the light faded, I whispered softly to myself, I'm okay. And for the first time, it was true. The world outside was quiet, the air warm against the window pane. The garden swayed gently in the wind, and somewhere deep inside, I felt the faintest spark of something new. Not love, not yet, but hope. The kind that doesn't shout or demand attention. Just a quiet whisper that says, you made it through.